Guys,
I got it.
it's a pleasure to be here tonight. So let me start by just saying thank you to each and every one of you. I know it's a rainy, cold night, and I know there's an ACC basketball game on. I'm for Wake Forest. That's the most controversial thing I'll say tonight. I know Chick-fil-A was closed before I got here, so I know it's a tough night to be here. Thanks for everybody being in the room. Who am I and why should you care? So let's talk about that. We've got an open Senate race, as you probably know, in northeastern North Carolina right now. Redistricting, we get a new Senate race. I've never done anything like this before. So here's my speech. For those of you who are worried about how long this is going to take, I'm going to talk a little bit. Here, I'm getting my photo taken with my index card. Right, zoom in on it, yeah.
He's got a Clemson jacket on, watch it.
So no worries, here's the speech. So I thought I would talk just a little bit, and then I'm going to take your questions. And my only request on questions is, there's only one bad question, and it's the one that's not asked. Ask away, I'll give you honest answers. If I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know. I may not agree with everybody in the room on my answer, but I'll give you an honest answer. How about that? So we'll just go that way. Let it rip. All right, so you're not going to get involved with somebody you don't know a little bit about. So my name is Clark Twiddy, and I live in Dare County. I live behind the fire station in Collington, and I'm very happy to be there. So when we got a new Senate seat, I decided to throw my hat in the ring because I believe it's only through participation in the political process that we will achieve the best answers and the highest good to the greatest number in our community. And when I say community, I mean northeastern North Carolina. I believe that good leaders and good public servants engage open-minded discussion and seek the best answers through that discussion. And then it's very important to bring folks with them because, after all, this is a job interview. This is a job interview tonight, and I am asking to be interviewed by you guys. You're looking to hire me as a public servant. So here we go. So that's part of it. I've only done two things professionally. I grew up on the Outer Banks. I grew up in Duck. I've got 4 or 5 generations of family over here in the Hollywood Cemetery. My grandfather and father grew up in Edenton. I spent the first couple of years of my life in Edenton, and we moved to the Outer Banks. My great-grandfather, I wish he were here now. For those of you old school, the city years had a general store on Water Street called Twiddy and White. And so we've got some deep roots in the area there. So here we are. I was in the Navy for 10 years. I got out of school. I went to VMI, joined the Navy for 10 years. I was a Navy intel guy, which means I watched a lot of CNN and went wherever they told me. And spent some time in the desert, and then went out, got to grad school, got called back, and here we are. So for all you Navy folks in the room, thank you for your service. I know I've got a Navy guy, although he's a Syracuse fan in the room too.
Well, praise the Lord, somebody has wisdom.
Wake Forest, second from the bottom. So, all right, so we joined the Navy for 10 years. My family has a family business. We're fortunate enough to live and work on the Outer Banks. It celebrates 40 years this year. So it's got about 150 folks, and we're only successful one person at a time. And the secret to our 40-year success has been the people who work there, certainly not me. So here we are. I've done those two things, and I've done a little bit on the public service side. I'm a newcomer to politics, but not public service. I serve on a couple state boards, the Community College Board. I was on the Roanoke Island Commission. I'm on the board of Town Bank. I'm on the board of a couple of other organizations, the Outer Banks Community Foundation. So it's important to me to be responsible for how we spend money and things like that. So I'm getting to the end of my speech. So why do you do this? Who am I and why should you care? I think if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. Our district is getting bigger, and we need to make sure that we continue to be represented well in Robin. So, 3 things. Lower taxes, less government, more individual liberty.
Oh, you
Those
stole
are
that
the 3
from the Tea
principles.
Party. No, Maddie.
No, it's a great, so when you talk about, hey, how do you run for office, what do you say? You can't say everything. Frederick the
Those
Great,
were the right answers.
yeah, for the military guys in the room, Frederick the Great said if you defend everything, you defend nothing. So you come down to a couple of principles, and then you go down the road hard, I think, on those principles. Having said that, I've never done this. So, and I also, it's very important for me not to be divisive or any kind of way that doesn't reflect well on the party. Actually, I know I've got an opponent who's real popular in Elizabeth City, and I actually thank him a lot for the work he's done in the House of Representatives. And I wish him all the best, no matter how the election goes, moving forward in the years to come. So I think that's very important for me to say that. So I really do wish that. So, having said that, here we are. That's probably a good spot for me to begin to take some questions. Am I lost anybody yet? I don't see any smartphones coming up. All right, I've got a couple questions. All right, I'll tell you what, who wants to hear the rest of my speech and who wants to ask questions?
I want to hear the rest of what you got to say.
Okay. I think one of the things that's important is a fresh perspective in Raleigh. I think we've got to get out there, we've got to continue to talk about things. I think a business background is good because it talks about how to serve and how to make things happen and carry out a budget. I think that's a good thing. I think good relationships across the district is a good thing. Having some deep roots in the region I think is important. But also the ability to listen well and the ability to engage productively in conversation with everybody in the room all the time. So one of the things I would hope that I would be very accessible to you and responsive to you. After all, if it's important to you, it's by definition important to me because the idea here is public servant. Public servant, the most important word there is servant. Serve you. That's the job. That's the job. You hire me to go do a job. So that's very important. So that's the short version of my speech. So I won't bore anybody in this room to tears. I won't do you a disservice by droning on and on. I suspect from questions we'll get tonight, we'll get into some pretty interesting issues and we'll be able to talk about that constructively. Is that a fair spot so far? Okay. Here, that's my speech. I covered everything in here. There we go. All right. Who's got a question? The only bad one's the one that's not asked. NRA hat, and then I'll go back to you, sir. Please.
Yeah, how do you differ from Steinberg?
You know, it's a good question. So I'm not here to be cast aspersions or to be aggressive, so I won't do anything about saying things that are bad or different. So I won't do it. I applaud his service in the House of Representatives for the past 6 years. I think he's done a good job with that. So I think it's important from this point forward to agree on that. Having said that, 6 years, I think we're at a spot where new ideas and fresh perspectives are important. And for that matter, all the time, I think that's important, whether it's 2 years, 6 years, or 20 years. So I think moving forward here, one of the areas where we differ is a fresh perspective. I think in terms of a business background in the area that focus on economic development and job growth, I think that's very important. I do that every day. I think that's very important for our region. We went from 9 counties to 11. And we do that because our district, people-wise, is getting smaller, because our young people are leaving. And the only way to prevent that from happening is growing our economy. And we've got some big economic levers we can pull. We can do that through education, through economic development, through lower taxes, less government, more liberty, and education. I think that's one of the biggest differences is I'm an outsider. Bob's been there for 6 years. And I think I would bring another perspective to it that is still deep-rooted in the area, understands northeastern North Carolina, but might bring more of an economic focus to it that I think we need in our history in our district right now. We did an event in Manio about a week or two ago, and we were right next to Elizabeth II. And my comment to the Elizabeth II is, hundreds of years ago, our forefathers, and I don't mean to be dramatic, but it's a true statement, got on that boat, and they left, and they sailed across the ocean, and they gave away everything they had because they believed in the values of starting over. And my comment today is, that journey's not done yet. We as a people here in North Carolina, as you know, Perquimans and Pasquotank has some of the oldest history in the world, right? It's certainly in North America. Yeah, I got a correction over there, good. I don't think that journey is done yet. I think we as a people are still on a journey, just like those people who came here those hundreds of years ago. And I think tonight, and in the years to come, it's just another page in that journey of us as a people. And I think it's a government of, by, and for those people. All right, that's the end of my speech. Francis just gave me a head nod and said, shut up. All right, so there we go. All right, yes ma'am.
As an employer and
Yeah, you can't hurt my feelings. Please.
As an employer and regarding hashtag #MeToo issues,
Yes,
what
ma'am.
are your policies regarding relationships between superiors and subordinates?
Relationships, superiors, and subordinates. Well, there's two ways to answer that question. We've got a military component. We know that what the answer to that is in military components. And then there's a business component to it. Business means you can't really get into a private world too much. So we've got to be careful with that. I'm not sure a private employer has a space in that world, in that personal relationship space, because I think that's a slippery slope. So as a business component, what matters is delivering value to customers and having a good workplace culture. If it's detrimental to culture, that's very important. I think culture is the key there. So it's a tough question to answer. Military is very clear, not as clear in the business world. I didn't give you a very good answer, but because you almost have to get specific for each case, and then when you get specific for each case, you bump into all kinds of employment law, which means you can't really talk about some of those things. I always start with culture and responsibility. If it has, let me answer that way. if it is detrimental to a culture, or if it's detrimental to the performance of the job requirement for any individual unit. If you're using a position of power for individual gain, I think that's when it becomes an issue. You had two questions. Did I answer both of them? Okay. Yes, sir. And then I'll go up here.
You started out at VMI and then you had 10 years in naval intelligence.
Yes.
Why did you, after 10 years, why did you decide to get out of the Navy? Was it?
No, actually, my wife's family is a Navy family. Great question. My wife has two brothers on active duty right now. One's out in Pearl Harbor, the other's a Super Hornet pilot. Her father's a Navy guy, her grandfather's a Navy guy. And the short answer is, Navy was a wonderful job, best job I've ever had in my life. I'd asked enough of my wife. I was always gone. I had 4 combat deployments, and I just wasn't around. And I was getting ready. I got involuntarily recalled and sent out for a year. We wanted to start a family, and I knew if I came back, I was going right back out. So I felt like I'd asked enough of her.
And did you go to graduate school then after you left the Navy?
Yep, so I got off active duty. I was 10 years old when Top Gun came out. I watched Top Gun as a kid. And for a 10-year-old to sit in there and watch that movie, so 20 years later I got posted to Top Gun. And then I left active service, went to grad school, got a U.S. Congressional Scholarship to attend the George Herbert Walker School of Government at Texas A&M. And then was involuntarily recalled, although there's no such thing as service not being.
So your graduate degree is what, political science?
Actually, international affairs, and I was recalled with 3 credit hours to go. So, yep, in the Navy I served in Japan, served in Korea, served in all through Iraq and Afghanistan, and then out in Nevada, and then back to Afghanistan.
So are you a member of the VFW or the American Legion?
I'm a life member of both. So, yeah, that's very important. I used to be the post commander at 10950 down in
Did you really?
Yep.
Oh, we just baptized their little baby auxiliary.
Yeah, we did indeed. Thank you for doing that, by the way. Big deal.
I-
Yes, sir.
I
You've got one
last-
more, and then I've got this lady up here.
What's your stand on renewable energy, solar, wind?
Hot topic right now. Hot topic. So green energy is wonderful. I believe green energy has to work in the free market. I'm not a big fan of subsidies for green energy, and I'll tell you why.
Thank you.
I think, so here we have a business in Dare and Prairie Tuck counties. We don't get any subsidies. We hire 500 people in the summertime. We create a lot of jobs. We create a lot of value to tourism in northeastern North Carolina. I would have a hard time watching another business go get subsidies that we have to pay for through our tax-generated dollars. So I'm all for the free market making it work. I think the folks who do it, the developers, should carry a bond, not just for installation, but to take it apart. And I think there should be provisions to make it pretty. I don't think everybody should have to look at it all the time, because I do think there's a visual appeal that impacts property values. Now, having said that, I'm also a private property guy. I work in the real estate business. If you have a piece of property and you want to develop it and put a solar farm on it, it's your property. You ought to be able to do with it as you choose. You just shouldn't ask anybody else to pay for it. That's the short version.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. And then I'll come back.
On that.
Please, let her rip.
On the solar energy, how do you feel about the offshore drilling issue?
Hot topic and big deal right now, especially on the outside. Tourism is our engine, and the risks to offshore drilling are remarkable. So I think we've got to do two things, such as a spill, such as the impact of tourism. Now, hang on, so I don't want anybody to think I'm anti-drilling. It's a federal issue right now. Florida is out there. Florida is a little bit different. You talk about an exemption in Florida and North Carolina, but then Virginia, I believe, is giving off some indications they're going to move forward with it. So the fear is a spill in Virginia or anywhere else washes up on the Outer Banks. So I think we have to do a lot of work on safety. We're all familiar with the British Petroleum incident down in the Gulf and the terrible impact it had on tourism. For those of you who don't know, tourism in northeastern North Carolina is a $1 billion economy, more than that every single year. So fast forward 20 years, $20 billion. I talked to Mikey Daniels the other day, who's in Wanchese, who's in the commercial fishing business. He seems to think offshore oil drilling might bring the capability to pay for beach nourishment and inlet dredging.
Absolutely.
So you get into that, and I have a banker friend who tells me wonderful advice every time I talk to him. That's some of the best financial advice I've ever heard. You can have anything you want, but not everything. So I think we can't have everything we want. We can't have unlimited funding for some things and then say no to other things. The last component of it is, I'd be really interested to see if it's North Carolina jobs. If it brings great jobs to North Carolinians in this district, that's one thing. If it brings great jobs to people in Norfolk and Newport News, that's different. Now we're not getting our folks good jobs. Hot topic, I understand that a lot of folks are adamantly against it because of the fear of a natural environment. The Outer Banks people come because of the natural environment. I think we've got to be really careful. Safety, and I want to see the economic impacts, and I also want to see the ability for the oil companies to reinvest in the area.
Are you weighing the benefits of offshore drilling against the problems that come with shipping it on rail, like with Warren Buffett's railroad? And this is an argument that's usually lost in the media.
You know, the short version is I am not familiar with all the different components of offshore drilling. I think it's really complex. But I think the more we hear about it, the more we have to weigh, and these are the open-mindedness that get into complex conversations, and we'll get to you. I think we just have to lay all those things out. What I worry about, here's my biggest fear on offshore drilling: surprise. Anything that we say, oh my gosh, we didn't know that. Oh my gosh, that was a big surprise. Oh my gosh, if we'd have known that, we never would have done it. We have to make sure there aren't any of those on the table. So let's talk about the good, bad things can happen, good things that can happen, and how we're going to move it and that kind of thing. But it's coming along pretty quickly, so I think there's a sense of urgency on it. I understand energy independence. I read an article today, the United States is about to become the #1 oil producer in the world. Pretty remarkable. But I also understand if we had a bad incident, one of those British Petroleum Deepwater Horizon incidents, our major economy, particularly on the Outer Banks, but then obviously water impacts everybody. This is a water district. Big problem there. Yes, sir. ESPN, has anybody checked the score yet? I know you have.
Historically,
Call it Fox instead.
historically in the state of North Carolina, northeastern North Carolina has been neglected, economically distressed. Now that you have a larger geographic area to make your fortune in life, with the exception of Currituck and Dare, the rest of the counties.
Sure.
Okay. Raleigh has chosen both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party to turn their back and put their investment in Raleigh and Charlotte as the economic engines. Well, my point being, how do you see a mechanism or a strategy or a pathway to improve the quality of life and raise the standard of living in your senatorial district of northeastern North Carolina?
Absolutely. And I'll answer that.
Yeah.
Big picture, we know since the recession, North Carolina has actually come out really well. But we know that the gains in North Carolina, economically and population-wide, have been centered in the urban areas: Mecklenburg, Raleigh, Wake County. Someone told me that day the equivalent of the state of Nebraska has moved to North Carolina in the past several years. We're now the 6th most visited state in the country, and our population is somewhere around 8 or 9. So do I think that we're on the losing end of the stick? We got to play a bad hand. I think we're too close to, and this is, I'm going to compare it to Charlotte, and you're going to think that's weird. A lot of South Carolina tilts to Charlotte in that particular part. Northeastern North Carolina, as we all know, when we pick up the Virginian Pilot or watch Wavy TV 10, tilts to the Hampton Roads area. And now we got an interstate, we're talking about 87. I think our future is in tilting to Virginia. And I don't say that because I want to be a Virginian, I say that because Virginia Beach is the biggest city in Virginia. Huge industries there. I think it's going to be tough if we focus all on Raleigh. I think that's still obviously the capital. Politically, legally, we focus on Raleigh. Economically, I think we look up to Virginia.
Well, you know, we're still sending almost 60,000 people a day from North Carolina into Virginia.
Absolutely.
Okay, and it still is what it is, regionally, and the only other advantage is that free trade zone designation, and that's the only real change in any component that I see outside of how do we attract industry to hire our people in our areas.
Yeah, I think one of the ways to do that, I think, is great relationships. A lot of times we think about great relationships in North Carolina. I think we got to focus on great relationships in Hampton Roads too. I think in Suffolk, in Norfolk, in Virginia Beach, in Chesapeake, and all those areas, I think we work really hard up there to say, hey, wait a second, real estate prices are going up there, much less expensive here. Hey, we have good transportation. We've got a great workforce, particularly with the Coast Guard base and things like that goes back and forth with our hospitals, our universities, COA. I think those are great areas to go up to Virginia Beach and talk about that and begin to say, hey, wait a second, We're right here, and we think we've got a big role to play. And I use Suffolk as an example. Many of you remember, Suffolk used to be cornfields.
Yes.
Not that long ago. I've got some relatives who are peanut farmers up in Suffolk. Now Suffolk is booming. Suffolk is booming. And I don't know why we can't be like that too and offer good jobs and good transportation. And I would argue the same thing Suffolk had, we have too. It was just easier to go into Suffolk than it was here. Yes, sir, NRA, and then I'll get to you, Pete.
How do you feel about bringing vocational training back into the high school?
I love vocational training. I love vocational training. I think, and this isn't a criticism, I think we got focused somewhere on making sure that all of our students went to a 4-year college program and then graduated college and went from there. I think that, particularly there was an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, I don't know if you had a chance to see that talked about the conundrum a lot of students are in right now about going to a technical school versus a 4-year institution. I think technical schools and vocational training at COA right now on the outer banks, we're working on a vocational program that focuses on hospitality. The assistant district attorney, I believe, in Dare County starts at $38,000 a year. That's a lawyer. A plumber, licensed, an HVAC person, an electrician. Go look at the cars they have in their garages. And they're nice cars. If you want to be a young man...
How many welding jobs are out there we can't fill?
And the welding jobs, part of the reason our welding students don't graduate from community colleges is because they get hired halfway through their training process because the companies say, if you're good at it, we'll hire you and train you ourselves. I'm all for it, and I think vocational and technical training has a huge role. I'm fortunate to serve on the state board for community colleges. North Carolina has 110 community college campuses, 58 colleges, 800,000 students. I'm the chair of the strategic development plan for that program. So I think that's very important moving forward because it trains workers for the jobs we have and the jobs we want in the future. That's a little dance, I know. Yes, sir. Pete, I'm sorry. I'll get
Common Cause came through here a couple of weeks ago about redistricting. They were taking and put it in the hands of the
Oh my God.
a bipartisan panel overseeing state workers, taking it out of the hands of the General Assembly legislation. What are your feelings on this?
I'm not much of a big fan on anything taken out of the hands of our elected officials.
Amen.
Praise God.
Just because I feel like our elected officials, going back to the foundations of this country, government of, by, and for the people. That's it. And the people are manifested, the people's will is manifested in our elected officials. So I think if it's funded through public money, it needs to come through the General Assembly, period. Pete, and then yes, ma'am.
I was only going to make a comment when you
Please.
talk about going to Virginia. I will tell you, we send a lot of people, you know, I was telling the young lady here, reading, writing, and the road to Virginia, the 3 R's.
Used to be the road to Raleigh.
I love Virginia.
What people need to understand, what our representatives need to understand, if we're going to have that philosophy we want to partner more with Virginia, we want to be more centric with Tidewater, we need public transportation.
Amen.
From this area to the transportation hubs in Virginia. They have a great system of public transportation there. We're going to have to do something to go up 17 and up 168 with some type of mass transit to move people in the morning. So, for one thing, it's like the Daytona 500 from 5:30 to 6:30.
That's what I hear.
On both roads. We have accidents all the time, and it would be much simpler if we had some type of mass transportation. And the government is, you know, they throw money out both pants legs for things like that. So there's no reason we couldn't get some smart people to develop some type of grant to develop a light rail from Elizabeth City and say Currituck or somewhere along there with stops along the way all the way. You know, that's something that we need to be looking at. Our legislature needs to push something like that.
I think we've got 87, the interstate, we're talking about 87, which I think is a huge deal for northeastern North Carolina. That interstate, you look at places like Rocky Mount that have multimodal access to transportation, trains and interstates, they've moved as a result of that. So I think that's a big deal. Here's the controversial thing. I worry that we're going to get, remember we can have anything but not everything. I think we need to figure out as a region what's our number 1, number 2, and number 3. And I think we have to understand we're not going to get everything. So if we say light rail, then I worry the Mid-County Bridge falls off the plate. And that might be the right answer. I love the idea of that bridge getting built. I think it's great for our tourism economy. But if we agree as a region that this is a better opportunity, I think we just have to have that conversation and be open-minded and figure out what brings the greatest good to the greatest number. So, did I answer your question? Okay. Yes, sir, and then Holly.
I don't know if you know the status of voter ID. I think they're trying to refine it, meet court standards. Are you a supporter of voter ID?
I believe that if you need an ID to buy Sudafed,
Thank
you ought to have an ID.
Yeah.
I mean, how many of us go every, and I know that could be controversial, and I don't mean that to
It's not
not include
controversial.
anything. But
It's
how many
common
times a
sense.
day do you use your driver's license for something, or some kind of form of ID? But if you needed to go get Sudafed, I think you needed it.
Where my time, I know.
Yeah. there you go. Holly, go ahead.
Mr. Twiddy, you said something.
Please call me Clark. My mother called me Clark.
You don't mind if I decide what to call you, do you?
No.
Great.
Holly and I are on different sides of the aisle. This would be a good one.
So here's the deal. I just heard you say a little while ago in making an analogy to this region, to Charlotte, with regard to looking to our borders for economic opportunity, that we would find it weird that you would say that. And then I heard you talk about being new and the new shiny bright penny in Raleigh. Well, I have a hard time reconciling these two things, and I've got two questions for you.
Okay.
Years ago, Governor Pat McCrory spoke to the Northeast North Carolina and gave us huge amounts of attention on this very issue, that the key was Hampton Roads area, etc. So we don't find it weird at all that you would make an analogy with Charlotte, because we've heard that now for years. Okay? So here's my two questions. I'd like to get into some substance about this region rather than the kind of generalities that we've all heard about, you know, this education versus community college, etc. We've rehashed those issues for years. Two specifics that I'd like you to address. One is the Albemarle Commission. What do you think of its purpose, the work that it does, and its funding formula? And secondly, tell me about your position about Mike Morgan in the last election.
Albemarle question, tough questions. Let me back up for a second and say, guys, I love these kinds of questions. Remember, the only bad question is the one that's not asked. And if we all can't sit in a room and have this kind of conversation, we'll never achieve the greatest good for the greatest number. So even though Holly and I are on different sides of the campaign in this instance, this is a great debate. Number two, I don't know. Number one, the Albemarle Commission.
Number two, are you saying the second question you don't know?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Don't know. Number one, Albemarle Commission. It's got a good reputation. I'm not exactly sure what the benefit they bring to Northeast North Carolina, and I don't mean that to be a derisive or negative comment. That could be very well that I don't know the answer to that. As a private business person, I've never dealt with the Albemarle Commission,
Sure.
so I'm not sure I can articulate the economic benefit or the education benefit. I just haven't dealt with it.
I just want to follow up and say, I just applauded your voter ID, so even though we may not agree on a particular race or candidates, I'm thrilled to death that you came to speak to this group and that every candidate agrees to do that. It's very good for us and healthy for the party. I also thank you for your frankness about not being aware of some of the more substantive issues in the area.
There are two, so here's one of my lessons learned, and thank you for that. That's very kind of you. Two things I've learned in politics. Number one, if you're going to hope to be the best possible candidate, and you hope to do that because no matter what you're running for, you hope to be a good candidate because you want to make your parents proud and your family proud, you've got to embrace criticism, which means not everybody's going to agree with everything you do. And you hope that people criticize you because you got to get better. If 2 years ago I looked at anything I did 2 years ago and said, wow, what a smart guy I was, man, I haven't gotten any better over the past 2 years. All the time. And then I think good leaders embrace scrutiny, so when we ask those tough questions, sometimes the answer is going to be, I don't know. So I'll give you two honest answers on that. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Building a little bit on what was said earlier about this area, and what Holly was talking about. I used to work in a nonprofit in Valley.
Which one?
Valley, one time it was Riverside CDC and
Yeah.
the So now I'm gonna go.
Is Nora Jarvis still over there?
Just a-
Yeah, I was in Board of Girls.
So, one of the biggest things that I see is.
Mona, we're not hearing you well back here. Can you project?
Sorry, that was my fault. We got into a conversation there.
So, it seems like my concern, and I'll be very frank
Here,
with
keep
you,
talking. I don't mean to come around behind you.
is, all the focus is on DARE and,
Yeah, fair
Truck
question.
and all of that stuff, because it generates so much money. That we're kind of like the redheaded stepchildren in Pasquotank County, the Clemens, everyone seems to think, what do we have to bring to the table, so y'all guys really don't need anything, you're mostly a Democrat region, and one doesn't.
Yeah, I've heard that, about people that said, Mark, this campaign is about more than DARE and Curry Cup.
So
Keep talking.
how do
Let her rip, it's a fair question.
some assurance that this area is going to be focused also?
Absolutely.
That we're important.
Yeah, absolutely right. And you touch on a theme, and this is a very important theme. This theme is, we don't have a seat at the table anymore, and no one cares about what we think or what we do. The focus is on, and forget about DARE or Curry Talk, although that's important in this district. Writ large across the state, it's Raleigh and Charlotte. And the next thing you know, you hear about two Carolinas. We don't want two districts. You hear about urban Carolina and rural Carolina. We don't want within the district DARE and Curry Talk tourism, and then all of a sudden all these other districts. To your point, our average employee in the summertime drives 84 miles. A lot of our employees work in Quimens and Pasquotank, and guess what? We go out of business without them. Our business could not work without them. So that's very important. So when you go down this road, one of the things and one of the promises and the covenants that I think you offer to people are, number one, you're not perfect. Number one, you're not going to agree with everybody all the time. And in fact, if there's good representation in the room, it will rarely be unanimous. But I think you do say, I will do my best to represent you, and you, and you, and you, and I'm going to count on your feedback to guide me as I do that. Because guess what? Look at me. I'm a goofy, bald-headed guy who doesn't know the answer to important questions. And what does that mean? That means I need your help. So the way to do that is, the way to say, hey Clark, how do we know you're not forgotten? Call me. Shoot me an email. This is Lindy and Abigail and Carolyn right here. What do you do when you run for office? You surround yourself by people who are smarter than you are. So that's what we're doing. Call us and tell us what's important to you.
And some good luncheon with me if I had to say something.
I met Lindy at a banquet in Washington, North Carolina, when I was very beginning to think about this, and she was working on the World Reserve campaign. And I just said, hey, listen, if I'm going to do this, I can't do this by myself. I've never done it. And I need some people to help me and guide me down this road. But guess what? I need your help too. So to answer your question, how do you make sure you're not forgotten? The way to do that is, I will stay in touch with you, and I hope you'll stay in touch with me. And when I do things good, tell me, and say, do more of that. And when I screw things up, tell me even faster, and tell me what I should have done, and I will correct mistakes quickly and innovate quickly, and I will test and listen and test and listen, and I'll vote the district. This is important. We're going to vote the district. And here's the other thing. We've got to get along with everybody. Here's the blunt truth in northeastern North Carolina right now. We ain't going to get nothing if we don't work together. And that's the truth as a private citizen. We've got to work with everybody, because Raleigh's getting a lot bigger in a hurry, and so is Charlotte. So how do we get along with those folks and still maintain our identity and our heritage here in northeastern North Carolina? Yeah. We can't surprise them. And I can't surprise you with what we do. It has to be clear and concise and open all the time. And we also can't surprise the people in Raleigh when we go against them, even within the own party. Commercial fishing is a good example of that.
Oh, God, don't even get me started.
Yeah, we can talk about that in Dare and Currituck County. We've got a regulator boat builder in the room. You know these guys build 7 boats a month?
A week.
A week, I'm sorry. I was shocked at that. I would have said 2 a month. I would have said 2 a month. 7 a week is unbelievable. Regulator boats is a big deal.
Probably know a couple of friends.
Mr.
of mine
Twiddy,
already.
in the interest of being...
Please, yep, and I'm cognizant on time.
In the interest of being generous Republican Party, I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't tell you, Mike Morgan is the Democrat who voted against voter ID and got elected to the state Supreme Court in the last election, which gave the Democrats a majority. So
Thank you.
that may be information you want to have when you're talking to Republicans.
Here's the best story. I had somebody tell me this the other day. The beauty of an idea is, so if you have an apple, if Lindy has an apple and I have an apple, we trade apples, we each have one apple. If Lindy has an idea and I have an idea, we share ideas, now we each have two. That's the magic of multiplying ideas, so thank you for that. Okay, yes sir, you're running for office, thank our public servants. And you two are running against each other. That's awesome you can come this room together. Yeah. That's an example to our young people.
It is.
Yeah.
Not to change gears, nobody get mad at me, but there's a couple questions I had that means something to me,
Let her rip.
probably other people. Your stance on school safety for local law enforcement in light of the recent shootings we've
Yeah.
had, one. Two, mental health and opioid abuse, that issue there, and kind of interested in, funding, you know.
Yeah, you and I talked about that. So he gave me a heads up on these questions. Wow, what a hot topic. Florida. Kid safety. Did I saw on Amazon they sell bulletproof backpacks now?
Yeah.
I'm not making that up.
Yeah, they make, like Kevlar, I've actually considered
Kids
buying
are
them for
actually
my
buying
kids.
those.
Oh,
I've
Parents,
actually
I'm sorry,
considered buying
parents.
them for my kids.
They've had inserts for that.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a sad place for prostitution.
Yeah.
I mean, with my kids, there was an incident at the middle school.
No doubt.
All right, so yeah, so number one, that's amazing. I don't like big new funding, so I'm gonna give you two answers. I generally don't like big new funding because it's gotta come from somewhere. So where's that money coming from? There's two levers to pull. Anytime we talk about, the old joke is, no matter how thin you pour a pancake, it's got two sides. So the money we can either raise taxes or reappropriate lower revenue, one of those two. Having said that, it's hard to see an issue that's more important in America right now than the safety of children in schools. So it'd be a great conversation to have. Guys, where can we get this money from without raising taxes to get
You
some
lean on
more
the people
school
that are
resource
willing to
officers?
step up and help.
Yeah, so I'm all for making our kids more safe in schools. And if that means more school resource officers, to be honest with you, I didn't realize that you and I talked about elementary school and middle school. That was a shocker to me. So, yeah, that's what he was saying. So,
Sixth, seventh, and eighth grade.
Yeah.
The kids who are just hitting
Scary.
puberty, the kids getting ready to go into
Yeah.
high school, it's a bad mix.
yeah, my little girl's too, so the idea that
Yeah.
she... So anyway, this is a good example of me learning something from you tonight. No, by the way, if I don't learn a whole lot when I walk into these rooms, I've done something wrong. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And then opioid, you and I talked about opioid. Opioid crisis is worse than a Category 5 hurricane to me, folks. It's like if someone running down the street with a gun, we just can't see them. That's what's going on. It's a huge deal. We can clean up from a hurricane, but we can't clean up wrecked or gone lives. So your point was that you think some of the mental illnesses are closely linked to the opioid crisis, and we think we should begin to combine and treat those two simultaneously. If there are good ways to do that, perhaps even in conjunction with school resource folks, because I think so many problems begin at those kinds of ages, I'm all for that conversation. I'm not for big new appropriations, because I think we got to fund it, and ultimately it comes on the backs of the taxpayer. But having said that, if there are opportunities to reallocate funds that come available to these new things, I think that's a great conversation to have, because what's more important than that? A yes ma'am in the back, and then I've got four. Here, I'm going to let, Betsy was so kind to shoot me an email tonight. Betsy.
Okay. Do you support schools being required to report problem children?
You know, what a good question. I know in Florida that was a big deal. So it's funny, right now, I'll tell you my immediate reaction. I think about my little girl. And I think about, if she goes to school, should someone who's a problem child be required to report? My human being says report to who and define the problem. Socrates said anytime you start with something, you start with a definition. So my first question would be, let's define problem and let's define report. But I know it's a hot topic right now because we talk about what was missed in Florida. So
I'll give you an example that's happened in this county. One in an elementary school, one at a middle school this year. A child in 5th grade at an elementary school was humming. And here they go, well, if they're not bothering, it might be their culture, so don't stop them from humming. This child, sitting beside this child humming, told the teacher, well, I can't concentrate. So then she said something to the child, and he or she went ballistic, running down the halls. They locked the door to keep the child in the hall. The resource officer wasn't there. They called 911.
Resource officer, that's how important that is.
That's the school, yeah. but they weren't there at the school, so they had to call 911 on the child. If you have to, so I'll make it specific. If you have to call 911 on a child, should there be a report made?
Yes.
Okay. The same thing happened at River Road. The child actually ran out of the school and ran across into a neighborhood.
Here's what I also think, their identity should be protected, so if that report's made,
Don't have a
it
problem.
shouldn't be that Clark Twiddy had got in trouble at school today. It should be a child, but there should be some mechanism within something that protects their identity as a minor to get them some help or some treatment or something that says, we may need some additional focus on this, because that to me is the disproportional response. Asking me to stop humming, asking me to stop being a basketball fan, I wouldn't go run out of here. That's a disproportional response. And to me, that's the definition of the problem, is a disproportionate response. But I'm also big, I learned one thing from the military. I'll tell you everything I learned in the military in 10 years in one sentence. Personal dignity. You've got to do, we have a responsibility, and I left some of my best friends over there. Part of the reason I'm running is for them, they're not here. We have a responsibility, each and every single one of us, to protect the personal dignity of those less fortunate than us. I feel very strongly about that. So we got to be careful with that. Yes, sir, and then yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to make a suggestion. Your website, you need to, I mean, it tells a little bit about your background, but you need to put down there where you stand on Second Amendment.
Second Amendment, great question.
You need to start listing some items on your website.
Yes, you know, it's funny, so when you go down this road, you're like, well, I'm going to go register to run for office. And you're like, well, what do you need to do? And it's like, well, go to the courthouse, pay $207, and you're in. And then all of a sudden, people come to you and say, well, what do you go? Well, I need a website. Oh my gosh, I need some Facebook, and I got to do this. Second Amendment, I think the only requirement to carry a pistol is the Second Amendment, period.
Thank you.
But having said that, there are a couple of mental health a little bit. But my wife and I are both lifetime members of the NRA and both have our concealed carry license. My wife's a better shot than I am.
Just a heads up. I'm sorry. Okay, a heads up. This year, 2018, we are the Northeast Prosperity Zone.
Yes.
We are in that cycle
Yes.
with the Golden Leaf Foundation
Yep.
and the Tobacco Settlement Agreement monies. Well, the process is going along very bureaucratically at this point. I have a meeting with one of the local county managers tomorrow morning regarding addressing some ideas about pursuing the grant monies.
Yep.
Okay? I think it tops out at about $1.5 million. But there's money available for some innovative ideas, and this has to do with promoting agriculture, or expanding agriculture, or going into to more sophisticated and or more contemporary ways of growing specific crops and so forth.
Cotton 72 cents a pound right now?
Anyhow, it remains to be seen what progress we make, but it flips back to partly to the Albemarle Commission, because my initial inquiry last year was through the Albemarle Commission, and I just don't really see any progress on their part, and they represent 10 counties, and one of their charges is economic development. So where do we go with it?
I'm a little confused at, so when you, from personal experience, when you look to go hire somebody, when you want to go find a bunch of people to hire, where do you go? Thank you for coming, sir. Where do you go? It used to be you'd go to like NC Works, or you'd go to the unemployment office, and then you go to the Albemarle Commission, but I can't make that link right now. We haven't hired
NC
anybody.
Works is under the Albemarle Commission.
Okay. Yeah. There you go. Yeah, big deal. And if it's a slow response, we've got to speed it up, government of for the people. Let me get to these two ladies, and then I'll circle back around to you.
That's fine.
Ladies,
I've got two questions. First of all, I want to thank you for coming tonight.
thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
This is a good meeting because you're here, not because
I'll get back to you on that after my meeting tomorrow, because I'll be looking for
Well, he told me I have until halftime, and then I had to shut up at halftime.
this
to get out.
county, Camden, and about 4 or 5 others
Do you still have your
to participate
lieutenant
in a
governor campaign
particular
committee
program.
open?
You know, I don't believe so. So when I did this, I was running for lieutenant governor, I'll say why, because Dan Forrest, you guys met Dan Forrest?
I'm the chair. Yes, sir, I have.
Dan Forrest is an inspirational guy. I think, when I first met him, I'll tell you a funny, you probably want to hear a funny Dan Forrest. First time I ever met him, I was going to community college, and I was going to get sworn in. So I was nervous as can be in some big fancy boardroom. And I'm just standing there shaking like a leaf, and he came up and started chatting with me. And I didn't know who he was. And I said, I just got nervous and started talking. I said, well, I hear Dan Forrest is going to be here. He said, yeah, I hear too. I said, yeah, he's a pretty big deal. And he said, nah, you'd be surprised. And didn't say another word. And then walked into the room and stood up and said, hi, I'm Dan Forrest. And came and smiled at me and said, Dan Forrest, nice to meet you. When we switched gears, Senator Cook reached out to us and said, would you be willing to do for this? We switched gears, and with with Lindy's help and with a guy named Doug Raymond's help, who's my campaign manager, we believe we shut that down. But I also understand we think we shut it down, and the State Board of Elections thinks that there's some paperwork out there that we either didn't do or is in the system. We're trying to track that down right now. Great question.
The other question is, I know it's a lot of things we want to get accomplished in our state, but I feel personally, until we have some serious welfare reform, nothing is going to be accomplished. We're just draining the working class people dry. How do you feel about welfare reform or changing a lot of policies? Or
Lower taxes, less government, more liberty. I believe that welfare has a role for short-term things. I think that's what it was intended to do. Nobody in our society today should go hungry at all. Nobody. And I think that's what welfare was intended to do. Having said that, once it becomes a lifestyle, it becomes a disincentive to work. And as a private employer, when you have to compete against an entitlement, because then people don't measure their salary by its total, they measure by what they're getting at and above a certain welfare level. I think that's a disincentive to work. And when we have a disincentive to work, then that raises a whole bunch of other problems. And I think we just have to jump into that. So I'm not a big fan of long-term welfare entitlement. I think we're rolling it back. North Carolina's making some gains at that, but I think we still have some ways to go. As long as it's a disincentive to work, it's broken.
well, North Carolina did pass, like for food stamps, you have to work now to get your food. You have to work 20 hours a week or volunteer 20 hours a week. But that is it doesn't work because there's 12 exemptions.
Yeah.
If you're homeless, you're exempt. If you're an alcoholic, you're exempt. If you're a drug addict, you're exempt.
Yeah.
It goes on. So everybody now that comes in to apply, they're all homeless. So hardly nobody is getting cut off from their food stamps.
Our sheriff officers have probably heard this before.
Yeah.
Deputies. When you invent the law, you invent the cheat.
Yeah.
So there's no perfect law. And why isn't there a perfect law? Because there's no perfect person. There will never be a perfect law.
But we create laws and rules, but then we have all these exemptions that cover, if you go back to what...
I think our laws should be dynamic because they're for us and by us. I think we need to make sure that they're constantly up to being evolved, and I think that's important. So if it's not perfect now, it never will be. If it can be better, let's make it better, and let's continue to provide feedback to our folks in Raleigh that this is we're on the right track. Let's evolve it.
I disagree
Yes, sir.
with you. I think
Please.
there is personal law, and think the Ten Commandments is a perfect law, and that's the perfect law. The problem is people don't keep it. I can't keep it.
That's a fair point. You're right.
Then again, we're all sinners, Frankie.
Well, right, you can't keep it. I agree with you.
Guys, 8:15 is when I was told that this meeting would break up tonight, so I'll answer every question, but I want to be respectful of your time. Yes, sir.
You didn't bring any clock bars tonight.
You know why? I'll tell you why. They were in the back of my pickup truck. Remember that warm spell we had last week? They all melted. That's an honest answer. So now they're all these big globs. So we're going to use them in an ice cream social tomorrow and crunch them up and put them in bud. You know, I thought that was a silly idea when I first started doing this. I was like, what can I do? And they were like, well, get cart bars. And I was like, I'm not a candy bar. I don't want to be a candy bar. That's the best thing that ever happened. And I go, that gentleman right there, I walked in.
Yeah, that man.
And he said, you're that candy bar guy.
I went to the convention and put on 5 pounds of corn.
I went through those cart bars in no time.
He got half of them.
Yeah, we're wiping them out, yeah. So that's a good idea. All right, folks, what other questions do we have? Yes, ma'am, and yes, sir. Okay, yes, ma'am.
Just a quick question where, and I know we talked about Derek Turtuck a lot, but listening to or reading about the bag ban issues down there.
Sure.
Where would you have said, would you have brought it up? It seemed like it was brought up out of nowhere and against the will of people that might have been against it when it was first started, but learned to live with it and realized it was a good thing. Would you have brought it up?
The intention's good because our natural environment's all we've got. So anything that protects our natural environment is a good conversation to have. I'm not a big fan of banning bags because I think you start to get really far down in the weeds, and I think there are a lot of things that are out there. I would have said that's on the right track, but folks, when I go back to that banker's advice, Taylor Sugg, as who told me that, We'll have everything but not everything. I'm not sure that would have been my top 3. So, is that a fair answer? Okay, call BS on me. I'm serious. That's my job, give you a straight answer. Yes, ma'am, and then there was another one. Okay, got it. Fair question. The only bad question is the one that's not asked. Gentlemen, ladies, yes, sir.
Would you consider supporting trained canines in schools?
I'm going to ask for some advice on that. Gentlemen, tell me what we should do on that.
I think they should have routine walkthroughs.
Routine walkthroughs?
With canines that are already established that age.
We should have availability of canines within our department that are trained to do sniff searches, and they should be utilized on a regular basis.
That's my position. Part of this job is how well do you listen. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Yes, sir.
Just a statement. Structural engineer serves on the code council in Raleigh with me, and they worked on a project in order to get tiny houses in North Carolina to manufacture. They worked over a year and 2 months, and they could not get approval to build the tiny houses in North Carolina. They moved to South Carolina. Within 6 months, they produced them, put them on the market, and sending them back to North Carolina. North Carolina has too many hoops to jump through.
Lower taxes, less government, more individual liberty. Yeah, I got a cool email the other day to go to the BMW
Thank you for
driving
endorsing
school.
the Tea Party once again.
It's in South Carolina. It's in South Carolina. Yes, sir.
All night we've talked, we've not hit
This is
social
going to be a good one.
We have not hit social issues at all.
Okay.
I'm going to be upfront with you.
Please.
You've used a word that makes me very edgy.
Good.
We talk about being
I'm glad we can
open-minded.
disagree.
I didn't say, I don't know if we disagree or not,
Okay.
but when I hear about open-minded, I come from a faith culture where open-minded is code word for being liberal.
Sorry, John.
That's a fair point. You're right. That's
It
a
is
fair
code
point.
word, I mean, and I'm a United Methodist pastor, and the open-minded people are all in favor of what we normally identify as liberal social positions.
That's a fair point. You're right.
So, and if that's what you are, that's fine, just tell me that.
No, let's have this great conversation. So how are you open-minded? And this goes back to 2 of the promises we make as public servants, or those of us who are competing to be public servants. Vote your district, and don't surprise anybody when you do it. So here are the principles. When we say open-mindedness, let's agree on a couple of principles, and then be open-minded in conversations about school resource officers and opium and canine dogs in accordance with principles. Probably like most of us live our lives. We go about making decisions every day in accordance with principles. Lower taxes, less government, more liberty. And that we do believe that things are important and non-negotiable. So in terms of social policies, you're right. You hear about open-mindedness. Does that mean laissez-faire? Live and let live, do whatever you want, who cares, there's no law, moral relativism? Absolutely not. That's not what made our country or our state great. Those of us, we've all lived in eastern North Carolina now, many of us for hundreds of years. That's not who we are as a people. We're eastern North Carolinians, and we believe that there are laws in and amongst us. Some are reflected in Raleigh, and some are reflected on Sundays.
I would like to follow up.
Let her rip. Any questions?
You said vote your district. The whole state had a referendum a few years back about the practice of homosexual marriage. And this area here, even though it's predominantly Democrat, voted that they did not want it. Statewide, we voted didn't want it. And
66.7%.
our Attorney General went against us. If you are going to represent us, if that's how we voted, how do you respond to this issue?
That's a pretty simple one to me. You reflect the people in your district, so if the vote is that way, I'm that way.
So you would disagree with what the Attorney General that day did?
Yes.
That's very important because I know my ABCs.
Short answer.
Anybody but Cooper.
And that's an elephant in the room. I've gotten beat up on making donations to Cooper. We're happy to talk about that. So yeah, bring that. It's a fair question. I guess my wife asked me that question, so let her rip. The company and my perspective on that was always to have good relationships on both sides of the aisle as a business person, because I think that's what you owe your employees, and it's also what you owe your customers. So I did do that. guilty as charged. He wasn't running for governor at the time, I didn't know. And I made a mistake. If I had to do it again, wouldn't do it. We also supported a lot of Republican candidates, to include my opponent, to include Pat McCrory, to include Dan Forrest, Senator Burr, Senator Tillis, everyone above the commissioner level we supported on the Republican side. So you live and learn, and you make mistakes, and you embrace criticism, and you get better, and you grow as a person, and that's what we did. But that's true, so I get beat up for it.
All I'm concerned about is if you are elected, that you will vote what this district wants.
If I'm elected, and just from my own, that means I work for you. So guess how many bosses I have just in this room? Every single person in this room, to include John Holy. So,
Oh, no, we're not going to include John.
I didn't know who he was the first time he called. He was like, "Hey Clark, it's John Hawley." I was like, "Hey John." And he's like, "Can I ask you some questions?" I'm like, "Sure." John, what do you do? He's like, "I'm a reporter." I was like, "Okay." Yes, sir. And I'm cognizant of 8:15 because I'm respectful of everybody's time.
United States Constitution, North Carolina Constitution. You believe they're living, breathing documents, or are you going to enforce the Constitution?
I'm going to give you a tough answer. I think you have to enforce the Constitution, but I believe that things evolve over time.
Oh, no,
Well, here, I'll give you a good example. And I know what you're saying, but here, let me talk about Facebook. Unrightful search and seizure. Does search include social media?
Yes.
Tough, so that's why I say it's a little tough. We just have to define those things as things evolve. But having said that, I'm not in favor of rewriting.
Unlawful search and seizure includes every thing that you do.
So social media, those kinds of things, technology, iPhones, laptops.
If you are on a Facebook account, that's up to Facebook to police you.
Okay.
It's not up to the government.
All right, tell me how important this issue is in this room. Is this a major issue?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Definitely is.
All right.
So what would you say about all the amendments that have been applied to the Constitution? That means they changed it.
The amendments were voted and ratified.
Of course. Which anything you do to change the Constitution, that's what you would do.
But the judicial system is trying to change the Constitution.
Yeah, no, that I'm adamantly against. That was
There is a difference.
I'm adamantly against our laws in our country being decided in courtrooms.
Let me ask you, I have a question about that.
Okay, how am I doing on time, guys?
Just getting good.
What do you plan to hold judges accountable for when they don't follow the law?
Yeah, hot topic right now. Hot topic in North Carolina. What's the role of our judges? Should they be partisan? Should they be nonpartisan? Are they subject to some kind of review?
They'll always be partisan.
Are they appointed for life? We've got a combination of both right now. There is talk, as you well know, about judges' races being partisan.
Why not?
The tradition of the judiciary, as you know, is independent, going back to John Marshall. I just read a great biography of John Marshall. Talks about Having said that, many of our elected officials are elected, which means they are held accountable.
I don't disagree. My question was not that. My question was, if you have a judge, like the judges in the 9th Circuit and the 4th Circuit, if we have judges like that in the state that are obviously finding their findings are not in accordance with our Constitution, they're legislating from the bench.
Yeah.
What tools do you think you have available to hold them accountable?
I think the issue is state and federal, so we have to be clear on what those
I'm
two
talking
are.
about state, I'm not talking about federal. I know what the rectification is on the federal side. We can impeach them. And so what tools do you think you have available on the state, at the state level, to hold judges accountable when they're not following the law?
The short version is I go read the Constitution. I'm not exactly sure individual mechanisms, what lever we
If you
can.
need a class taught, I can do that.
Okay, good. I'm not in favor of judges making laws. That's specifically reserved for the General Assembly. So when we have the cases of judges making laws, there obviously is a review mechanism. I think they're going out there exceeding the scope of that authority. And I think there should be a mechanism to say you have now stepped beyond your purview and your envelope, just like any of us would do in our day-to-day jobs. I read the Constitution. Short answer is I don't know, but I believe we're on the right track and agreeing on that one. Okay.
Is it not true that the Supreme Court Justice of North Carolina has some control over all the judges of the state of North Carolina? He is actually their boss, in a sense?
I had a good conversation last week. We did that in Manio, and Senator Warren Daniel was there. He's the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. my reaction to that, I'd call them and ask them. And say, hey,
I
what can
think
we,
they do have some
what can we do
control.
about this? And hey, if we get out of line, just like in school, how do you get back into line? So, but it's not a free-for-all. A free-for-all only hurts everybody. Okay, how am I doing on time? I want to answer every question, but I know that everybody has places to go, people to see. Thank you for coming, and for those eating all those Clark bars.
Now you better support his daughter at Hardee's.
Oh, good. All right, guys, how am I doing?
Good.
Thank you.
All right,